It's been called the most high-profile cold case in Canadian history. A 16-year-old girl raped, beaten, and left for dead in a snow-covered field in Quebec. Her name was Sharon Pryor. It's taken police nearly 50 years to crack this case that's haunted investigators and Sharon's family since the day she disappeared. Now, Canadian detectives say the answer to who killed her is buried here at this cemetery in Putnam County.
It's a combination of the most evil element in the human race contacting the most innocent element in the human race, the child.
A combination of evil and innocence that's haunted a city in Canada for 48 years. A case that had gone cold until being resurrected 900 miles away in West Virginia, landing with seasoned Putnam County prosecutor Mark Sorcea.
Some things are worse than death. Losing a child like that, for family, for mom, to know that your child died that way.
Her name was Sharon Pryor. 48 years ago, the 16-year-old left her home to meet friends at a nearby restaurant. She never made it. 3 days later, on April 1st, 1975, her body was found in a field in Longueuil, Quebec, outside of Montreal. She was 15 miles from where she was kidnapped. She was lying on her back in the snow, her pants removed, and her underwear found hanging from a nearby tree. She'd been restrained with tape. Some of it was stuck in her hair. The 16-year-old had been raped and tied up with a blue men's shirt. An autopsy determined Sharon was strangled and beaten to death. She had a branch clutched in her hand. Sorcea hadn't heard of the case that took place so long ago and so many miles away. That all changed the day he learned Canadian cold case detectives believed her killer was buried not far from where he grew up in Putnam County.
There's a family, guy killed and raped a girl. We're going to help our friends in Canada, and we're going to, be on the team and get it done.
In March, Sorcea petitioned the Putnam County Circuit Court to find out if the man buried in a rural cemetery in Fraser's Bottom could really be the man who brutally killed Sharon. His name was Franklin Maywood Romine. The case that Longueuil police in Canada had built against him, a man that had been dead for 40 years, was remarkable.
What's amazing about the case is we found this guy, and he probably never gave a DNA sample in his life.
In the decades of investigation and countless tips, suspects, and interviews, Canadian detectives say Romine's name had never come up until last year, when a DNA profile that was removed from that blue t-shirt and Sharon's underwear and pants made it possible to target the last name of the suspect.
Then they got the name Romine. So then they just started looking at their criminal records. Well, they see this guy being very active in Canada and Montreal in the 70s, right? Violent activity, in and out of jail. And then they start looking at the West Virginia criminal records. And then they see that he beat and raped a girl in Parkersburg and got convicted of it. Well, then bang, you have a suspect.
Romine had a criminal record that started when he was a child. By 1964, when he was just 18, he'd made his first attempted escape from the West Virginia penitentiary. He'd be in and out of jail before his next escape in 1967. 2 years later, he'd start committing crimes in Canada.
You can track his location by his arrests. He's always getting in trouble. So you could see this date he's in West Virginia, and this date he's in Canada, and this date he's in West Virginia. So we have a window. We can tell when he was incarcerated and when he was on the street. He was probably incarcerated half the time, and then he'd be on the street, and then he'd go back to jail.
In 1974, deputies in Wood County said he broke into a home and raped a woman in Parkersburg. He was released on bond and fled to Canada. Sharon Pryor would be raped and killed a year later.
We have a window in his freedom corresponding to the death of the child in Canada.
He'd eventually be extradited back to West Virginia and convicted of the Parkersburg attack. After serving his prison time, he was back in Canada by 1982, the same year he died at the age of 36. How he died remains a mystery. Detectives haven't been able to find a death certificate. His body was returned to his mother in West Virginia, where his family dug his grave, here at the Pine Grove Cemetery.
Matter before the court is the petition of the state of West Virginia in the matter of Franklin Maywood Romine, deceased.
But was the case that started in Canada enough to convince a judge in West Virginia to allow the extraordinary step to exhume his body and prove once and for all that he was the killer? Longueuil Police Detective Eric Rassicot was ready to lay the case on the table and on the record for the first time in hopes Judge Philip Stowers would agree it was the only way to close the case.
We can speculate all day on it, but we won't know the answer until we open the grave to see the remains.
The detective testified for nearly an hour about the facts of the case and about how a 22-year-old woman named Cheryl Roy was nearly abducted at knife point in the same area and around the same time that Sharon would have been walking to that pizzeria.
The suspect told her in English not to scream and to follow in. He also told her when she fights back, you bitch, you're coming with me. So that is an important fact since the official language in Montreal was and still is French.
The woman told police that the English-speaking man was white, in his late 20s, about 6'2", 200 pounds, with brown hair, a mustache, and a blue ski coat. The detective said that description matched Romine's at the time, along with a footprint found at the crime scene that would have matched his shoe size. Tire marks were also found in the snow-covered field, and they determined the type of tire would have only been used on 37 models at the time. One of them was a Wrangler, the same type of car Romine had bought from a woman who lived in Sharon's neighborhood.
Very interesting, and I bring your attention to the fact that this address is only 2 blocks away from Sharon's house.
Then the bombshell. There was more damning evidence pointing to Romine, and science backed it up. Both of his brothers had voluntarily given DNA samples to police. The detective said showed their samples from the crime scene were 140 million times more likely to come from their brother than any other random Caucasian. One of the brothers telling police that Romine probably did kill Sharon and claimed Romine had tried to rape his wife while he was away serving in the Marines.
As a result, he and his brother were never close again.
But when it came to digging up their brother's body, the Romine siblings did not agree, writing a letter to the court that they adamantly protested the exhumation of his remains, saying they didn't think it was necessary given there may not be enough preserved DNA to prove anything. They said it would be impossible to exhume his body without disturbing their mothers.
We don't want to cause any prejudice against the Romine family. We only want to ease the pain of the victim's family. And we think that the only way to do that is by opening the casket of Franklin Romine to get his DNA and to confirm, once and for all that it is the killer of Sharon's brother.
The judge agreed.
They have, in fact, very narrowly, before they took such a step to exhume a body, have meticulously decided in investigating the murder of Sharon Pryor that they've developed DNA evidence, they've developed location information, they've developed automobile information, body and build information relating to the decedent. And the court believes that given that there's sufficient cause here to order that the body be exhumed, and that information for DNA purposes that needs to be retrieved will be permitted.
Three and a half weeks after that crucial ruling, it was exhumation day. It's the first time the cold case unit from Canada has met the West Virginia team, the group that worked to put an end to their mystery.
This was a big case in the time, and today to be able to go in Virginia, hoping to find a good suspect in this case, and maybe give some answers to the family who's been with us for the last 48 years in this case. it will be a big relief for us, and it will be a major relief for the family.
Sharon's mother, Yvonne, now 85 years old. Her 3 siblings also hopelessly waiting for answers they feared may never come.
Family for sure will be emotional about this because they follow the investigator. Every time they have a lead on the investigation, they try to help us. They did some research for us. They were really, really big partners in this investigation.
After hours of digging, crews had reached Romine's casket that laid inside a steel vault. Is there a chance that there may not be the answer that you're looking for?
I can't be absolutely sure that we're going to get a DNA profile from this, but I think there's a good likelihood.
Decades of work coming down to these final moments. Detectives climbed into the ground to remove several bones and other evidence that would be flown back to Canada within hours.
And we're going to make some analysis on our evidence to have, we hope, a positive match from the leads that we had on the crime scene in 1975 and from what we recovered today.
But would there be the DNA they desperately need to close the case? Would it be a positive match to Franklin Romine? But most important, would a family get the closure they've sought for nearly 50 painful years?
Our main concern is we want the family to know that we never give up on this investigation, and we're now really, really, really close to finally have some answer for them.
Longueuil police met with Sharon's mother yesterday to finally give her the name of the man who they believe killed her daughter. Police tell me they should know with 100% certainty from those DNA tests within the next 2 weeks. Meanwhile, investigators here in West Virginia are reopening unsolved rape and murder cases during times Romine was in West Virginia and not incarcerated to see if he could be the missing link. Reporting in the studio, Leslie Rubin, Eyewitness News.
DNA testing has now confirmed that a West Virginia man raped and killed a Canadian teenager in 1975.
Reporter Leslie Rubin was the only reporter there as that suspect's body was exhumed in Putnam County exactly 3 weeks ago today. She's live now with reaction from the victim's family, who's waited nearly 50 years from the news they got today. Leslie?
Dave, Gina, a 100% match. Those were the words today from a team of investigators in Canada who have been working to solve this case since 1975. Sharon Pryor was raped and killed when she was 16 years old, kidnapped while walking to get pizza with her friends in a tiny neighborhood in Quebec. Now her family knows with complete certainty who took her life, and it's opening a whole new door for unsolved cases here in West Virginia.
The solving of Sharon's case will never bring Sharon back, but knowing that her killer is no longer on this earth and cannot kill anymore brings us to somewhat of a closure.
It's been more than 48 years since Doreen and Maureen Pryor saw their sister Sharon. And every day since that Easter weekend in 1975, they've had a single goal: find the person who took her life when she was just 16.
Life has not been easy for us since then, but Sharon has given us strength for the past 48 years, and especially today.
Their mother, Yvonne, who's 85 years old, sat and listened as detectives investigating her daughter's murder said today the words she thought she may never hear. The case was officially closed.
When you got the results back, you were able to see that 100% match. You probably already expected you were going to see that, but I'm sure it felt a little different seeing it in writing.
Yeah.
This was your guy. What was that like?
It was amazing. We were very excited. And as soon as we had the result, we went to see the family to share with them the good news. And also the result are loud and clear. It is a pretty strong match. And what I mean by that is that there is 41 billions times more chance that the killer is Franklin Romine instead of anyone else.
The exhumation of Franklin Romine from his grave at a Putnam County cemetery proving to be the final piece of a complicated puzzle. An investigation that never had Romine on the radar of Longueuil police until last year. Romine, who was born in Huntington in 1946 and lived to be just 36, lived the life of a criminal in and out of jail since he was a teenager. He spent what ended up being the last years of his life in prison in Moundsville for the rape of a woman in Parkersburg. The stunning nature of the Canadian case, a DNA hit on a man who never gave a DNA sample in his lifetime, and a crime that took place in a pre-DNA era, wasn't lost on anyone.
Your miracle of science gave the detectives the proof they needed.
Now the work here begins as Romine's profile heads to the FBI as the agency works to see if he's the answer other families may be waiting for.
I already received some phone calls from cold case investigator from West Virginia and Ohio and things like that. So we will be more than happy to work with them and return the favor.
Coming up Sunday on Eyewitness News at 10 and 11, I've put together a special report that explores what we know about Franklin Romine's crimes here in West Virginia and what police are doing to see if he could be connected to unsolved rape and murder cases here. Now you can catch up on all of our reporting on this. You can scan the QR code up on your screen right now to read everything that we've reported over the last month, including going through web exclusive videos, pictures, and documents that are only available on WCHSTV.com. Reporting live in the studio, Leslie Rubin, Eyewitness News.
Reporter Leslie Rubin, who broke the now international story of the exhumation of Franklin Romine's body from the Putnam County Cemetery, has exclusive new details about the West Virginia crimes that helped detectives link him to the infamous rape and murder of Sharon Pryor.
Franklin Romine only lived to be 36 years old, but had a criminal history that started when he was a child and continued until his death in 1982. He jumped back and forth between West Virginia and Canada for years, committing all kinds of different types of crimes, from thefts to forgery, and now it's certain he was the man that raped and killed Sharon Pryor when she was just 16. Her case unsolved for nearly 50 years until DNA taken from his grave in Putnam County proved to be a match to her killer. But it was a rape in Parkersburg that happened a year before Pryor's death that would help Canadian detectives zero in on Romine as a suspect in their infamous cold case. Former Parkersburg Police Chief Bob Newell was a young patrolman in February 1974. He remembers responding to a call about a break-in and sexual assault here at the now Homecrest Manor Apartments on the city's south side.
I believed her, I can tell you that. I mean, when she told me what happened and I saw the circumstances, I believed it happened. It wasn't one of those deals that I was skeptical myself. You know, the evidence was there.
A 23-year-old single mother who worked as a waitress told police Franklin Romine had broken out a window of her apartment, came in while she was sleeping, and raped her. He threw a $20 bill down before he left. Her 4-year-old son was in the next room.
The child actually woke up, and because she, heard the glass break and the commotion, the talking and so forth, and she convinced him that everything was okay, get back to bed, and which he did. And she again, just conceded to the fact that this was going to happen, and probably for her safety and safety of the child, just laid there until he was finished, and again prayed that he left, and he did.
In her testimony, she told a jury that Romine told her he had wanted her from the first time he saw her, and he was going to have her, even if it meant he had to kill her. She said she knew him through work. He'd come in and get coffee, and he'd asked her out before. Newell remembers how extremely difficult it was to get a rape conviction in the 70s. There was no DNA to prove guilt. And in 1974, when the crime happened, rape was a capital crime in West Virginia, punishable by life in prison.
Juries were very cognizant of that fact, and certainly, again, they always question, how the woman got in that situation to begin with. And unfortunately, I mean, that's just the way it was. And then when you tack on the fact that when you find this man guilty, he's eligible to go to prison for the rest of his life without parole. I mean, they really balked at convicting him of that. And so in many, many cases back then, the prosecutor would take a plea of like malicious assault, felony assault, which was like 1 to 10, things like that to get somebody to plead guilty and avoid a trial because it was just difficult.
But a jury did find Romine guilty. He would be the first rape conviction in nearly a decade in Wood County and the last capital rape conviction before state law changed to allow different degrees of sexual assault. A jury recommended mercy, but by the time the trial and conviction came, it was 1976, 2 years after the crime. Why did it take so long to go to trial? Romine had posted bond after his arrest and fled to Canada. Sharon Pryor was abducted on March 29, 1975, on her way to meet friends at a pizzeria. 3 days later, her body was found in a field in Longueuil, Quebec. She'd been brutally raped, strangled, and beaten to death. It would be 6 more months before Romine was tracked down in Montreal and extradited back to West Virginia for the rape trial that started in February 1976.
Knowing what we know now about Romine, he was probably obviously a sociopath all along. It wasn't anything he learned. You don't learn that, but he's a typical example of that.
Detective Sergeant Eric Rassico, the lead cold case investigator on Sharon's case, describing Romine's movements as a game of catch me if you can to the convict.
We know for sure that he was always playing hide and seek with law enforcement. So he was always going back and forth from Canada to the U.S. He was trying to avoid an arrest. So he was always playing with us.
When Canadian detectives got enough for a DNA profile of Sharon's killer from her clothing left at the scene, they were able to zero in on a last name through genealogy sites. Franklin Romine stood out. He had a criminal history in Canada and that rape conviction in West Virginia. That led them to West Virginia State Police Sergeant Eric McClung.
One of the print cards that we produced here from criminal records actually had an address for 2 blocks away from where she was abducted, where he lived at in Montreal. I thought we've got our person.
In September 1976, Romine was sentenced to 20 years for the rape and 1 to 15 years for the burglary in Parkersburg. He'd go to Moundsville, a prison he was notorious for escaping over the years, before his conviction was overturned by the West Virginia Supreme Court in 1980. He was awarded a new trial because of an inaccurate instruction that was given to the jury. But instead of opting for a new trial, he pleaded guilty to second-degree sexual assault. He'd already served enough time under the new sentencing guidelines to get out of prison, and he was released in 1981. He returned to Canada, where he died in 1982.
My understanding is that by trade, he was a truck driver, and that he ran a route between Canada and somewhere in the United States.
Now police want to know if he's responsible for unsolved cases. His DNA taken during that exhumation last month is now going into the Combined DNA Index System, known as CODIS. It's an FBI computer software program that operates local, state, and national databases of DNA profiles from convicted offenders, unsolved crime scene evidence, and missing persons.
If the DNA is already in CODIS and there's a hit, then that gives them grounds to open the investigation up and work it further.
For McClung, an investigator for nearly 30 years, it's a fascinating chain of events for a case that could have never been closed.
I've had people ask me, well, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Well, her mother's still alive, and if you can give her closure, there'll be no prosecution. There'll be, after the news story airs, and it's a done deal, but it at least gives the mother closure that they know who killed their sister and daughter.
A certainty that Sharon's killer isn't still out there. A closure her family didn't know if they'd ever experience.
We'll always be your mom, your little brother, and sisters who sat looking out that window that Easter weekend, hoping to see you walking on home. You may never have come back to our house on Congregation Street that weekend, but you have never left our hearts, and you never will. We love you, Sharon, now. May you truly rest in peace.
You can catch up on all of our reporting on Franklin Romine by scanning the QR code on your screen right now. You can also read through documents, pictures, and listen to raw interviews on this case exclusively on WCHSTV.com. Reporting in the studio, Leslie Rubin, Eyewitness News.